The metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the sweltering Georgia heat, but they weren't snapping onto the wrists of a criminal. They were locking around a uniformed police officer who had just made the worst, most arrogant mistake of his life by profiling the wrong man. Let's break it down. The oppressive mid-July heat of Oak Haven, Georgia, was enough to make the asphalt shimmer and distort the horizon. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of suffocating day where sensible people stayed indoors next to an air conditioning vent. Special Agent Arthur Pendleton, however, did not have that luxury. Arthur had been with the Federal Bureau of Investigation for 16 years, a veteran of the Atlanta field office, specializing in organized crime and public corruption. He was currently deep into a grueling undercover operation targeting a sophisticated narcotics trafficking ring that had effectively bought off chunks of the local county infrastructure. To maintain his cover as a mid-level logistics broker, Arthur was driving a faded, dusty 2012 Chevy Tahoe with a cracked passenger side taillight. He wore worn-out Levi's, scuffed work boots, and a plain gray t-shirt that clung to his broad shoulders, soaked with sweat after a 14-hour surveillance shift at a local freight yard. Exhausted and nursing a severe caffeine withdrawal, Arthur pulled the Tahoe into the sprawling, cracked parking lot of Mabel's Diner, a local institution famous for its cherry pie and bitterly strong coffee. He backed into a spot near the edge of the lot, a habit ingrained from years of tactical training. Always face the exit, always keep your back to a wall. He killed the engine, letting out a long, slow breath, and reached for the door handle. Across the lot, idling in the shade of a massive oak tree, sat an Oak Haven Police Department cruiser. Inside the cruiser were Officer Clayton Riggs and his partner, Officer Samuel Hoyt. Hoyt was 58, a tired, gray-haired veteran, counting down the agonizingly slow days to his pension. Riggs, on the other hand, was 26, barely 4 years out of the academy, and possessed a dangerous combination of profound insecurity and an inflated sense of authority. Riggs was a man who wore his badge not as a shield for the public, but as a weapon for his own ego. Riggs tapped his fingers aggressively against the steering wheel, his eyes locked on the dusty Tahoe. "Look at this guy," Riggs sneered, the wad of gum in his mouth snapping. "Out-of-county plates. Vehicle looks like it's held together by rust and prayers. And look who's driving it." Hoyt sighed, lowering his newspaper. "Clayton, it's 98 degrees out there. The man's just going in for a sandwich. Leave it be. We're on a lunch break." "Nah," Riggs said, shifting the cruiser into drive. "He doesn't fit the profile for this side of town. Let's go see what he's doing in Oak Haven." Hoyt rubbed his temples. He knew exactly what Riggs meant by profile. Arthur was a black man in a beat-up car in a predominantly affluent, white neighborhood. It was the oldest, most tired script in the book of bad policing, and Hoyt hated when his young partner tried to play the hero on a slow afternoon. As Arthur stepped out of his Tahoe, the cruiser's tires crunched over the loose gravel, rolling to an abrupt, aggressive halt directly behind the SUV, blocking him in. The cruiser's lights weren't flashing, but the message was clear. "You aren't going anywhere." Arthur paused, his hand still resting on his open car door. His eyes, sharp and analytical beneath a pair of aviator sunglasses, flicked from the cruiser's push bar to the two officers inside. His posture remained relaxed, but his mind instantly shifted gears from civilian mode to tactical assessment. Officer Riggs kicked his door open and stepped out. He rested his right hand conspicuously on the butt of his service weapon, an intimidation tactic Arthur had seen 1,000 times before. "Hold it right there," Riggs barked, his voice echoing across the empty expanse of the parking lot. Arthur turned slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his body. "Can I help you, officer? License, registration, and proof of insurance." "Right now," Riggs demanded, closing the distance until he was uncomfortably close, invading Arthur's personal space. Arthur's voice was remarkably calm, a smooth baritone that betrayed none of the sudden tension. "Officer, I'm parked on private property, and my vehicle is off. Under what suspicion are you asking for my identification?" The question, legally sound and politely delivered, hit Riggs like a physical blow. His face, already flushed from the heat, darkened with a furious red. He wasn't used to being questioned. In his mind, his uniform meant absolute compliance, and this stranger's calm defiance was a direct insult. "I don't need to explain myself to you," Riggs snapped, his voice rising an octave. "You look suspicious. Your vehicle looks suspicious. Now, give me your damn ID before I pull you out of here for obstruction." Arthur maintained eye contact. Behind his sunglasses, he was rapidly calculating the variables. He was carrying his FBI credentials, a concealed Glock, 19 inches, an inside the waistband holster, and a wire transmitter that was currently feeding a live audio stream to a command center parked less than a mile away. If I reach for my badge, he might see the gun and panic, Arthur thought. If I don't give him the badge, he's going to escalate to physical force. "Officer," Arthur said, lowering his voice, attempting to de-escalate the situation, "I assure you, I am not a threat, nor am I doing anything illegal. If you'll take a step back and allow me to reach into my vehicle, I will provide you with identification that will clear this entire matter up immediately." "Do not reach into that car," Riggs yelled, drawing his taser and pointing the laser directly at Arthur's chest. "Keep your hands where I can see them. Turn around and put your hands on the hood. Now." From the passenger side of the cruiser, Officer Hoyt finally scrambled out, looking alarmed. "Clayton, easy, son. Jesus. Just let the man get his wallet." "Back off, Hoyt. I've got this," Riggs shouted without breaking eye contact with Arthur. "I said hands on the hood." Arthur didn't move. He stood his ground, radiating an aura of absolute authority that completely dwarfed the young cop's frantic aggression. "Officer Riggs," Arthur said, reading the nameplate on the man's chest, "I am going to give you one opportunity to holster that weapon and rethink this encounter. You are crossing a line you cannot uncross." That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. To Riggs, it was a threat. Riggs lunged forward. He shoved his taser back into its holster, grabbed Arthur by the shoulder of his t-shirt, and violently spun him around, slamming him chest first against the blistering hot metal of the Tahoe's hood. The impact knocked the breath out of Arthur, the metal searing through his thin shirt. "Stop resisting!" Riggs screamed. Though Arthur hadn't fought back, it was a trained phrase, yelled purely for the benefit of any potential witnesses or body cameras, establishing a false narrative of a struggle. Hoyt was jogging over now, his face pale. "Clayton, what the hell are you doing? He wasn't resisting. Let him up." "He threatened me," Riggs shouted, his knee driving into the back of Arthur's thigh to force him to spread his legs. "Give me your hands!" Arthur, his face pressed against the dusty hood, realized that reasoning with Riggs was no longer an option. The cop was operating purely on adrenaline, fear, and ego. Arthur's primary objective shifted. He needed to survive the next 30 seconds without getting shot by a panicking rookie. He allowed his left arm to be wrenched painfully behind his back. "Officer Riggs," Arthur said, his voice dropping the polite civilian tone, replaced by the sharp, undeniable command of a federal agent. "Listen to me very carefully. My name is Special Agent Arthur Pendleton, Federal Bureau of Investigation. My credentials are in my left breast pocket. If you continue this assault, you will be facing federal charges." Riggs paused for a fraction of a second, the words hanging in the humid air, but the young officer was too far gone. Admitting a mistake now would shatter his fragile ego. He doubled down. "Yeah, right," Riggs sneered, pressing his forearm into the back of Arthur's neck. "And I'm the director of the CIA. You're going away for a long time, buddy." Riggs pulled his handcuffs from his belt. He snapped the cold steel around Arthur's left wrist, the ratchet clicking loudly, tightening it far more than necessary. "Click, click, click. Give me the other hand," Riggs demanded, reaching for Arthur's right arm. But Arthur didn't give him the other hand, because at that exact moment, the trap that Riggs had unwittingly walked into snapped shut. Arthur's wire hadn't just been recording. It was actively monitored by his supervisor, Special Agent in Charge Diane Croft, a formidable woman who did not tolerate local law enforcement interfering with her operations, let alone physically assaulting her people. Before Riggs could grab Arthur's right arm, the deafening roar of high-performance engines shattered the quiet afternoon. From the street, 3 matte black, heavily armored Ford Explorers jumped the curb, their hidden strobe lights blazing a blinding pattern of red and blue. They didn't just pull into the parking lot. They swarmed it. One Explorer violently fishtailed, its heavy reinforced bumper stopping mere inches from the side of Riggs's police cruiser, effectively barricading it. The other 2 formed a V-shape, boxing in the entire scene. Riggs froze, the dangling end of the handcuffs clinking against Arthur's wrist. The doors of the Explorers flew open simultaneously. 8 men and women clad in heavy olive-drab tactical vests spilled out. In glaring yellow letters across their chests and backs, the letters FBI stood out like warning beacons. They were armed with M4 carbines and sidearms, their expressions grim and strictly professional. FBI, nobody move. Hands where we can see them, a tactical agent bellowed, his rifle in a low-ready position, aimed generally in the direction of the 2 stunned local cops. Officer Hoyt immediately threw both hands straight into the air, taking 2 rapid steps backward away from Arthur and Riggs. "I'm clear! I'm clear!" Hoyt yelled, his voice cracking with absolute terror. He knew exactly what was happening. Riggs, however, was paralyzed. His brain couldn't process the sudden influx of variables. 10 seconds ago, he was the apex predator of the parking lot. Now, he was surrounded by a heavily armed federal tactical team. His hand was still gripping the cuff attached to Arthur's wrist. From the lead vehicle, SAC Diane Croft stepped out. She wore a tailored black suit that looked completely untouched by the oppressive Georgia heat, her FBI credentials hanging from a lanyard around her neck. Her eyes were locked onto Riggs like laser sights. "Officer," Croft said, her voice completely devoid of emotion, cutting through the heavy air like a scalpel. "Take your hands off my agent. Now." Riggs blinked, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. He looked down at Arthur, then up at the tactical team, then finally at Croft. His jaw worked silently, trying to form words, but nothing came out. Slowly, deliberately, Arthur pushed himself off the hood of the Tahoe. Riggs stumbled backward, completely letting go. Arthur stood up to his full height, brushing the dust from his shirt. He didn't look angry. He didn't yell. Instead, he looked at Riggs with a cold, terrifyingly calm gaze that made the young officer's stomach drop into his boots. The single handcuff still dangled from Arthur's left wrist, glinting in the sun, a physical testament to Riggs's colossal, career-ending mistake. Arthur reached into his left breast pocket with his free right hand. He pulled out a leather trifold and flipped it open, letting the heavy gold shield of the Federal Bureau of Investigation catch the light. "Like I was trying to tell you, Clayton," Arthur said quietly, the silence in the parking lot so profound that the buzzing of the cicadas seemed deafening. "You really should have checked the ID." Riggs swallowed hard, his knees suddenly feeling very weak. He looked at his older partner, Hoyt, for help. But Hoyt was staring firmly at the ground, his hands still raised, refusing to make eye contact. Hoyt knew the unwritten rule. When you step on a landmine, your partner doesn't jump on it with you. "Agent Pendleton, are you injured?" Croft asked, stepping closer to the perimeter. "I'm fine, boss," Arthur replied, though his shoulder throbbed from the impact against the hood. He extended his left arm toward Riggs, the empty cuff swaying gently. "Take it off," Arthur commanded. Riggs' hands shook violently as he reached to his belt for his handcuff key. It took him 3 tries to get the small key into the keyhole. When the metal jaw finally clicked open, Arthur rubbed his wrist, never breaking eye contact with the terrified cop. "Now," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "let's talk about the federal crime you just committed. Arthur Pendleton, Clayton Riggs, Samuel Hoyt, Diane Croft, Thomas Sterling, Harrison Riggs, Robert Caldwell." The silence in the Mabel's Diner parking lot was thick enough to choke on. The sweltering July heat beat down relentlessly, but a freezing tension had settled over the asphalt. Officer Clayton Riggs stood trembling by the hood of Arthur's dusty Tahoe, his face pale and slick with panicked sweat. The empty handcuff that Arthur had forced him to unlock felt like a 1,000-pound weight in his trembling fingers. Within 10 minutes, the wail of sirens pierced the quiet afternoon. 2 more Oak Haven Police Department cruisers tore into the lot, followed closely by a sleek, unmarked black SUV. Out of the SUV stepped Chief Thomas Sterling. Sterling was a man who looked more like a country club politician than a cop. He was immaculately groomed, his uniform sharply pressed, his silver hair perfectly styled. Sterling had spent the last decade carefully managing the town's image, ensuring the wealthy residents felt safe and the local tax base remained undisturbed. Seeing his officers corralled by a heavily armed FBI tactical unit was his worst nightmare realized. "What the hell is going on here?" Sterling barked, striding past the tactical agents who casually adjusted their rifles to let him through. He spotted SAC Diane Croft and zeroed in on her. "Diane, what is the meaning of this? You've got my men boxed in like cartel members." Croft didn't flinch. She crossed her arms, the very picture of federal authority. "Your man assaulted an undercover federal agent, Thomas. He bypassed every protocol, ignored verbal warnings, and initiated an illegal detainment with excessive force. We are securing a crime scene." Sterling's eyes darted to Arthur, then to the terrified Riggs, and finally to the older, defeated-looking Hoyt. Sterling knew Riggs. Clayton Riggs wasn't just a rookie. He was the son of Harrison Riggs, the owner of a massive local freight company and one of the mayor's largest campaign contributors. It was an open secret that Clayton's badge was a favor, a way to give a reckless, arrogant kid a sense of discipline. It had spectacularly backfired. Sterling immediately went into damage control mode. "All right, let's everybody take a breath. It's 100 degrees out here. Passions run high. It's a simple misunderstanding between jurisdictions. Clayton, go sit in the cruiser. We'll sort this out internally." "He stays exactly where he is," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the humid air with the force of a physical blow. Sterling turned, his eyes narrowing. "Now listen here, Agent. I appreciate you're upset, but you're in my town. I am in the United States of America, Chief Sterling." Arthur interrupted, stepping forward. He was still wearing the dusty, sweat-stained clothes of his undercover persona, but his posture radiated absolute command. And in this country, a badge is not a license to violate constitutional rights. Your officer didn't make a mistake. He made a conscious decision to profile, escalate, and assault. Riggs, sensing that his chief was trying to throw him a lifeline, suddenly found a scrap of his shattered courage. The arrogance that had fueled him earlier flared up in a desperate bid for survival. "He was resisting!" Riggs yelled, his voice cracking defensively. He pointed a shaking finger at Arthur. "He refused to show ID. He was reaching for his waistband. I thought he had a weapon, Chief. I followed my training to secure a hostile suspect." It was the classic, tired defense, the magic words that so often absolve bad cops of terrible deeds. "I feared for my life. He was reaching." Chief Sterling seized the narrative instantly. "You hear that, Diane? My officer had reasonable suspicion to believe your agent was armed and non-compliant. If your man wasn't wearing identifying gear and refused to comply with a lawful order, my officer acted within departmental policy." Croft actually smiled. It was a terrifying, humorless expression. "Is that your official statement, Officer Riggs?" Croft asked, her tone dangerously polite. "That Agent Pendleton was aggressive, refused to show identification, and reached for a weapon?" Riggs swallowed hard, looking at Sterling for reassurance. The chief gave a subtle, encouraging nod. "Yes, ma'am," Riggs lied, his voice steadier now. "I felt my life was in imminent danger." Croft turned to one of the tactical agents standing by the lead explorer. "Bring it over, Caldwell." Special Agent Robert Caldwell nodded, pulling a ruggedized, encrypted tablet from the front seat of the vehicle. He walked over and handed it to Croft. She tapped the screen a few times, turned the volume up to maximum, and held it out so both Sterling and Riggs could see the display. "Chief Sterling," Croft said calmly, "Agent Pendleton is currently embedded in a Title III wiretap operation. His vehicle is equipped with high-definition, multi-angle surveillance cameras. His person is equipped with a continuous feed audio transmitter. We have the last 15 minutes recorded in crystal clear, 4K resolution, backed up to our secure servers in Atlanta." Riggs stopped breathing. The color drained from his face so fast he looked as though he might pass out on the asphalt. Croft pressed play. The audio echoed across the parking lot. They heard Arthur's calm, measured voice. "Officer, I am going to give you one opportunity to holster that weapon and rethink this encounter." They heard Riggs's aggressive, panicked, screaming, "Do not reach into that car! Keep your hands where I can see them!" And then the video played. The tactical tablet showed a clear, undeniable angle from the Tahoe's passenger side mirror. It showed Arthur standing perfectly still, his hands visible. It showed Riggs lunging forward unprovoked, slamming Arthur violently onto the hood of the car, and aggressively ratcheting the handcuffs onto a man who was offering zero physical resistance. There was no reaching for a waistband. There was no hostility from Arthur. There was only a power-tripping rookie, assaulting a calm, compliant citizen. The playback ended, leaving a crushing silence in its wake. Chief Sterling stared at the black screen of the tablet, his jaw locked tight. The political shield he had tried to build around Riggs had just been shattered into a million undeniable pieces. He lied to a federal agent, and he lied to his commanding officer, Croft stated coldly. "That's a violation of Title 18, Section 1001. The assault falls under Section 242, Deprivation of Rights under color of law. We have it all on tape." The reality of the situation crashed down on Clayton Riggs with the crushing weight of a collapsing building. The nepotism, the wealthy father, the protective chief of police, none of it mattered anymore. He was outside the protective bubble of local politics, entirely at the mercy of the federal government. "Chief," Riggs pleaded, his voice a pathetic whine. "Chief, please. You know my dad. You know I didn't mean it like that. I just got spooked. Tell them." Sterling slowly backed away from Riggs, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. The political calculus in his head had shifted instantly. Defending Riggs meant going to war with the FBI over a thoroughly documented civil rights violation. It meant his own career would be dragged through the mud, and the resulting DOJ investigation would likely uncover the deep-seated corruption festering in the Oak Haven precinct. "I can't help you, Clayton," Sterling said softly, his tone flat and utterly detached. "You're on your own." It was a brutal, real-life betrayal. The thin blue line had just evaporated, leaving Riggs completely exposed. Officer Hoyt, who had been standing silently by the cruiser, with his hands nervously resting on his duty belt, finally stepped forward. He looked at Riggs with a mixture of pity and intense disgust. "I told you to leave him alone, kid," Hoyt said, his voice ragged. "I told you he wasn't doing anything. But you couldn't listen. You had to play the big man." Hoyt turned to Agent Croft. "Ma'am, for the record, I did not participate in the detainment. I advised Officer Riggs to stand down." "Coward!" Riggs screamed at his partner, tears of absolute panic welling in his eyes. "You're supposed to have my back." "My pension has my back, Clayton," Hoyt shot back bitterly. "I'm not going to federal prison because you have an ego problem." Arthur stepped into the space between the officers, his tall frame casting a long, dark shadow over the terrified rookie. The anger Arthur had felt when his face was shoved against the burning metal of the car had transformed into something much colder, much more precise. It was the absolute certainty of justice. "Officer Riggs," Arthur said, pulling a pair of heavy, black, hinged, federal handcuffs from the back of his own belt. "Earlier, you told me I was going away for a long time. You were half right. Someone is." Riggs began to hyperventilate. He looked wildly around the parking lot, as if searching for a route to run, but the FBI tactical team had tightened their perimeter. The M4 rifles were lowered, but the message was clear. There was nowhere to go. "Clayton Riggs," Arthur said, his voice projecting clearly so that every body camera and dash camera in the vicinity captured the audio. "You are under arrest for the assault of a federal officer and for the deprivation of civil rights under color of law." "No, wait, please," Riggs sobbed, his bravado entirely broken. He took a step backward, bumping into the grill of his own police cruiser. "I'm a cop! You can't do this to me! My dad will sue the Bureau!" "I'm a cop." "Not anymore," Arthur replied. Arthur grabbed Riggs by the shoulder, the exact same way Riggs had grabbed him just 20 minutes prior, and spun him around, pressing his chest against the hood of the Oak Haven PD cruiser. He didn't slam him. He didn't use excessive force. He used the exact amount of tactical control required to subdue a suspect. The physical poetry of the moment was not lost on anyone present. Arthur took Riggs's left arm, pulling it behind his back, and snapped the heavy steel cuff around the wrist. Click. "You have the right to remain silent," Arthur recited, his voice steady and rhythmic. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." He grabbed Riggs's right arm, bringing it to meet the left. Click. "You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." The handcuffs were on tight. Riggs was sobbing now, a full, ugly, hyperventilating breakdown. The invincible shield he thought his uniform provided had been ripped away, exposing the frightened, insecure bully underneath. Arthur stepped back, turning Riggs around to face the parking lot. The young man's face was red, streaked with tears and snot, his uniform completely disheveled. Chief Sterling watched in grim silence. Officer Hoyt looked at the ground. The FBI tactical team stood like stone statues, bearing witness to the swift, brutal hammer of consequence. "Caldwell," Croft called out. "Put him in the back of the transport. Read him his rights a second time on camera, just so there's no confusion." "Yes, ma'am," Caldwell said, stepping forward and taking Riggs by the bicep. As Caldwell led the weeping former officer away, dragging him toward the armored FBI explorer, Arthur adjusted the collar of his faded gray t-shirt. His shoulder ached, and his undercover operation was likely blown. But as he watched the heavy doors of the federal transport slam shut, locking Clayton Riggs in the dark, he felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Karma wasn't just a concept. Sometimes it wore a badge and carried a pair of federal cuffs. Arthur Pendleton, Clayton Riggs, Samuel Hoyt, Diane Croft, Thomas Sterling, Harrison Riggs, Robert Caldwell, Richard Gable. The atmosphere inside Interrogation Room B at the FBI's Atlanta field office was a stark, unforgiving contrast to the sweltering heat of the Oak Haven parking lot. The walls were painted a sterile, institutional gray, and the air conditioning blasted at a relentless 65 degrees. Clayton Riggs sat bolted to a steel chair, shivering violently. He had been stripped of his duty belt, his badge, his heavy boots, and his shoelaces. The arrogant predator from the diner was completely gone, replaced by a terrified, hollowed-out shell of a man staring blankly at his own trembling hands. Beside him sat Richard Gable, a high-priced, sharply dressed defense attorney whose hourly rate was usually enough to make state prosecutors sweat. Gable had been frantically retained by Clayton's father, Harrison Riggs, the moment the news of the arrest broke. For the past hour, Gable had been confidently whispering to Clayton that this was a jurisdictional misunderstanding, a minor civil rights hiccup that his father's money and influence could easily smooth over. The heavy steel door clicked open. Special Agent in Charge Diane Croft walked in, carrying a thick manila folder. Behind her was Arthur Pendleton. The transformation in Arthur was jarring. Gone was the dusty, sweat-soaked, undercover civilian. He was now dressed in a tailored, charcoal gray suit, a crisp, white shirt, and a subtle, blue tie. He looked powerful, immaculate, and utterly unbothered by the day's earlier violence. Arthur pulled out a chair and sat across the metal table from Clayton. He didn't say a word. He simply rested his hands on the table and let the silence stretch. allowing the sheer weight of federal authority to press down on the disgraced officer. "Agents," Gable started, flashing a rehearsed, confident smile. "I think we can all agree this situation escalated unnecessarily. My client was acting in good faith under stressful conditions. We are prepared to offer a formal apology to Agent Pendleton and discuss a quiet resignation from the Oak Haven Police Department to put this matter to rest." Croft didn't even look at the lawyer. She opened the folder and spread 3 8x10 glossies across the table. "Mr. Gable," Croft said, her voice freezing the air in the room, "your client isn't facing a departmental review. He is facing federal indictment. But before we get to his specific charges, I want to explain exactly what he interrupted today." Clayton's eyes darted to the photographs. They were surveillance stills. The first showed Arthur's beat-up Tahoe. The second showed the interior of the Tahoe's trunk, completely packed with shrink-wrapped stacks of $100 bills. The third showed a heavy-set man in a suit walking toward Mabel's diner. "For the last 24 months, Arthur began, his deep voice resonating in the small room, I have been embedded in a Title III operation, targeting a massive narcotics logistics network operating out of northern Georgia. My vehicle currently contains $400,000 in marked federal funds. I was sitting in that parking lot waiting for a meet with a high-level cartel money launderer." Arthur leaned forward, locking eyes with Clayton. "When you decided to play cowboy, pull your cruiser up to my bumper and initiate an illegal, unconstitutional detainment with lights and sirens. Our target was sitting at the traffic light across the street. He saw your cruiser. He saw you put your hands on me, and he rabbit-trailed. He burned his phones, abandoned his vehicle, and vanished. You didn't just assault me, Clayton. You blew a 2-year federal operation." Gable swallowed hard, his confident smile entirely vanishing. "Agents, my client had no way of knowing." "I am not finished," Croft snapped, cutting the lawyer off completely. "Here is where the situation becomes uniquely problematic for your family, Clayton." Croft pulled a fourth photograph from the file and dropped it in front of him. It was a picture of the heavy-set man from the previous surveillance photo, standing next to a very familiar figure on a golf course. Clayton gasped, all the blood rushing from his face. That's my dad." "That is Harrison Riggs," Arthur confirmed quietly, "owner and CEO of Riggs National Freight. The man you interrupted me from meeting today was your father's chief logistics dispatcher. The narcotics we have been tracking are being moved across state lines inside your father's commercial 18-wheelers. Riggs National Freight is the cartel's primary transit hub for the entire eastern seaboard." The silence in the room was absolute. Clayton looked like he had been physically struck. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The crushing realization of the hard karma he had unleashed finally hit him. "We needed a rock-solid, undeniable link between the dispatcher and your father," Croft explained smoothly. "That meeting today was supposed to provide it. You ruined that. However, because you assaulted a federal officer and violated his civil rights, you gave us something much better: unrestricted leverage." Arthur picked up the narrative, driving the final nail into the coffin. "You committed a felony under Title 18, Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law, because it involved the use of a dangerous weapon, your taser, and resulted in bodily injury. It carries a maximum sentence of 10 years in federal prison. Add the assault on a federal officer, and you are looking at 15 years. Hard time." Gable was sweating profusely now. He looked at Clayton, then back at Croft. "What is the play here, SAC Croft? What do you want?" "We already have what we want," Croft said, closing the folder. 3 hours ago, while you were crying in the back of my transport vehicle, a federal judge reviewed the footage of your illegal detainment. Based on your active interference in a narcotics sting, combined with your immediate blood relation to the primary target, the judge granted us blanket, emergency no-knock warrants for all properties associated with Riggs National Freight. Arthur checked his watch. As of 10 minutes ago, an FBI hostage rescue team breached the front doors of your father's corporate headquarters. IRS criminal investigation agents are currently seizing every server, ledger, and bank account your family possesses. Your father was taken into federal custody at his country club 30 minutes ago. Clayton slumped forward, burying his face in his shackled hands. He let out a long, agonizing wail of pure despair. His arrogance, his desperate need to bully a man he deemed inferior, hadn't just ended his own pathetic career. It had brought the full, unstoppable wrath of the United States Department of Justice down upon his entire family's criminal empire. He had single-handedly destroyed everything. "We didn't bring you in here to cut a deal, Clayton," Arthur said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "We brought you in here to explain exactly why your life is over, and to let you know that you did this to yourself." The fallout over the next 6 months was spectacular, a masterclass in hard, unrelenting karma. The DOJ Civil Rights Division descended upon the Oak Haven Police Department like a swarm of locusts. Chief Thomas Sterling's desperate attempts to distance himself from the Riggs family failed miserably when federal auditors found a decade's worth of bribes deposited into his offshore accounts. Sterling was indicted on federal racketeering charges, forced to resign in absolute disgrace, and stripped of his lucrative pension. Officer Samuel Hoyt, who had stood by and watched the assault, avoided prison by testifying strictly for the prosecution, but he was permanently stripped of his law enforcement certification and forced into a meager early retirement, bagging groceries at a local supermarket to make ends meet. Riggs National Freight was completely dismantled. The federal government seized over $80 million in assets, trucks, and real estate. Harrison Riggs, facing a mountain of undeniable evidence gathered during the raids, pled guilty to money laundering and narcotics trafficking. At 62 years old, he was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. As for Clayton Riggs, his high-priced lawyer couldn't save him from the crystal-clear audio and video recordings of his own unprovoked aggression. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. The gavel struck heavy wood, marking the definitive end of Clayton's unearned authority. Stripped of his badge, his family wealth, and his freedom, he was led from the courtroom in the exact federal chains he once weaponized against an innocent man. Justice, delayed by arrogance, had finally arrived. Arthur walked out into the warm Atlanta sun, knowing the city streets were genuinely safer today, one bad officer at a time.